Margaret sat at her kitchen table, flipping through a worn-out photo album. The pages were filled with memories of her modest childhood, her hard-working parents, and the tiny bookstore she had grown up in. The scent of aged paper still lingered in her mind, a scent that had once been her whole world. Her husband, Richard Thornton, was a billionaire, the owner of one of the world's most prestigious airlines. But to Margaret, he was simply rich, the same boy who had stumbled into her tiny bookstore years ago, looking for a book on aviation. While he had gone on to build an empire, she had never let go of her simple roots. One evening, as she browsed through the airline's website, a thought crossed her mind. She had never traveled on one of her husband's planes before, at least not anonymously. She wanted to see the world he had built, not as his wife, but as an ordinary passenger. So, without mentioning it to Richard, she booked a ticket in economy class under her maiden name, Margaret Evans. On the day of the flight, Margaret dressed simply in a floral dress and carried an old, well-worn handbag. She smiled at the airline staff as she checked in, blending in with the crowd. No one recognized her. As she boarded the plane, she found her seat, cramped between a young mother struggling with a baby and an elderly man who looked exhausted. She offered the mother a reassuring smile and reached down to pick up the rattle the baby had dropped. The flight attendants, however, were less than kind. They moved with an air of practiced indifference, their smiles fading the moment they turned away from first-class passengers. One attendant in particular, a sharp-featured woman named Lisa, glanced at Margaret with mild disdain. "Ma'am, please place your bag under the seat," Lisa instructed curtly. Margaret nodded, tucking it away. The baby beside her started to cry, and the mother fumbled with a bottle. Margaret reached out. "Here, let me help." She gently rocked the baby, humming a soft tune. The mother sighed in relief. "Thank you so much. It's his first flight, and he's so scared." Margaret smiled. Flying can be daunting. But kindness always helps. Lisa, however, was unimpressed. When Margaret pressed the call button to request a glass of water, Lisa sighed dramatically before approaching. "Yes, ma'am. Could I have some water, please?" Margaret asked kindly. Lisa rolled her eyes but nodded. She returned minutes later, practically dropping the cup onto Margaret's tray. "Here you go." Margaret thanked her anyway. As the flight progressed, Margaret noticed a shift in the atmosphere. The elderly man beside her coughed violently, struggling for breath. Margaret immediately reached for the call button again. Lisa returned, her impatience evident. "Yes. This man needs medical attention," Margaret said urgently. Lisa frowned but turned to assess the situation. She hesitated before saying, "I'll call the flight doctor." But instead of acting immediately, she took her time, stopping to chat with a first-class passenger along the way. Margaret couldn't stand by. She stood, steadying the elderly man with her hands. "Sir, stay with me," she urged. Looking around, she spotted another flight attendant and flagged him down. "Please, this man needs help now." The attendant, sensing the urgency in her voice, rushed to assist. Soon, a doctor on board was called, and the man was stabilized. But Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that Lisa had deliberately delayed action because they were in economy class. Minutes later, the pilot made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to extend our gratitude to a passenger in economy who helped in a medical emergency. Your kindness has not gone unnoticed." The elderly man turned to Margaret, squeezing her hand weakly. "You saved me," he whispered. "I won't forget this." Margaret simply smiled. "We're all in this world together. Helping each other is the least we can do." But just when she thought the flight would continue smoothly, Lisa returned with a scowl. "Ma'am, I need to speak with you." Margaret raised an eyebrow. "Of course." Lisa led her to the galley. "You can't just interfere like that," she snapped. "There are protocols." Margaret's voice was calm but firm. I understand protocols, but a man's life was at stake. Lisa scoffed. You act like you own the place. Margaret tilted her head. And what if I did? Lisa let out a short laugh. Please, you're just another economy passenger. Just then, the captain's voice crackled through the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special announcement. We have just been informed that one of our passengers today is none other than Margaret Thornton, wife of Richard Thornton, the owner of this airline. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Gasps rippled through the crew. Lisa's face turned pale. Margaret stepped forward, her voice steady. Yes, I am Richard's wife. But today, I am a passenger just like everyone else. And I have seen things I cannot ignore. She turned to the other attendants. Kindness should not be reserved for the wealthy. Every person on this plane deserves respect and care. What if that elderly man had been your father? Or that mother had been your sister? Lisa stammered. I didn't know. Margaret gave her a sad smile. It shouldn't take knowing who someone is to treat them with dignity. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes. She swallowed hard and nodded. You're right, Mrs. Thornton. I was wrong. Margaret placed a gentle hand on her arm. Then let's make it right together. By the time the plane landed, the atmosphere had shifted. The crew, humbled and transformed, made a point to be more attentive to every passenger. Lisa, in particular, approached Margaret before disembarking. Thank you, she whispered. For opening my eyes. Margaret simply smiled. Change starts with one small act. As she stepped off the plane, she spotted Richard waiting for her. He pulled her into his arms, his eyes filled with admiration. I heard everything, he murmured. You always find a way to make the world a little better, don't you? Margaret chuckled. Just doing what my heart tells me. Richard kissed her forehead. Then I'll make sure this airline follows your example. And true to his word, policies changed. Flight attendants underwent empathy training, and a new company motto was born, every passenger matters. It started with one woman. One act of kindness. And it changed everything.